Virginia's landscape hides stories far older than its colonial past, buried mounds, lost settlements, and ruins that defy explanation. From the vanished fort of Wokomoko to the secrets beneath Jamestown Island and the ghostly mounds of the Roanoke River, these ancient mysteries hint at civilizations, rituals, and legends long forgotten beneath the soil. The lost fort of Wokomoko. If you ever find yourself driving along the back roads of Virginia's Tidewater region, somewhere near the curve of the York River, you'll notice how still the landscape feels. The air hangs heavy with humidity, and the quiet stretches of farmland and marshland seem timeless, almost untouched. Beneath that calm surface, though, lies a mystery that predates Jamestown, Pocahontas, and even the first European map of America. This is where the lost capital of the Powhatan Confederacy, a place both ancient and sacred whose rediscovery has rewritten much of what we thought we knew about early America. Long before the English sailed up the James River in 1607, Wokomoko was already thriving. Oral traditions say it was the seed of Chief Powhatan's authority, where dozens of tribes across eastern Virginia came together under a single powerful network. It wasn't just a village, it was the center of a political and spiritual system that stretched from the Chesapeake Bay to the Piedmont foot. Archaeologists now estimate that people had lived there for at least 1,000 years before the English ever arrived. To the Powhatan people, Wokomoko was more than a capital. It was a sacred meeting place where human and spiritual worlds intertwined. According to their stories, this was where priests communicated with the great spirits of the land and sky, and where the tribal leaders met in council under Chief Powhatan's direction. It was a city of ceremony, negotiation, and belief. And at its heart, legends say a sacred fire burned without end, tended by the wisest among the Powhatan priests. But like many stories of early America, Wokomoko's fate became tangled with colonization. When Captain John Smith was captured in 1607, he was brought here to stand before Chief Powhatan himself. The story of Pocahontas saving Smith from execution, though heavily mythologized, traces back to that moment in But after the English founded Jamestown, the Powhatan Confederacy's world began to crumble. By the 1600s, war, disease, and displacement scattered the tribes, and Wokomoko faded into memory. Its name survived in a few old letters and maps, but no one could pinpoint where the great capital once stood. For centuries, people searched for it, or at least for what was left of it. Some believed it had been swallowed by the rising waters of the York River. Others thought it might lie somewhere near present-day Gloucester County. But by the 18th century, the location was effectively lost. Farmers plowed over its fields without realizing they were walking on the ground that once held a civilization's capital. To most, Wokomoko was little more than a historical footnote. Then, around the year 2001, something unexpected happened. A family living along the banks of Powhatan Bay, just off the York River, began finding artifacts after heavy rains. Small pottery shards, broken stone tools, and pieces of copper appeared in the soil. They weren't colonial, they were ancient. The family reached out to archaeologists from the College of William and Mary and the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. What began as a small survey soon became one of the most important archaeological finds in American history. Excavations revealed something remarkable beneath those quiet farm fields. The outlines of a vast settlement more than 50 acres wide. Soil discolorations marked where massive wooden posts once stood, forming palisade walls that encircled a central plaza. Inside those walls were longhouses, storage pits, fire hearths, and ritual zones. There was no doubt anymore. This was the long-lost capital of the Powhatan Confederacy. Wokomoko had been found, but what the team uncovered went far beyond simple structures. They found evidence of an organized and complex society that had been thriving for hundreds of years before European contact. Radiocarbon dating pushed the earliest occupation back to around 900 CE, long before Powhatan's reign. People had been living, trading, and conducting rituals here. The site contained thousands of artifacts, shell beads, carved stones, ceramics with intricate designs, and fragments of copper. That copper, in particular, baffled research. There are no natural copper deposits in eastern Virginia. The nearest sources are hundreds of miles away, deep in the Appalachian Mountains or beyond. This meant Wokomoko's inhabitants were part of a far-reaching trade network that connected distant native cultures across the eastern half of North America. The copper wasn't just functional, it was sacred. Many pieces had been carefully shaped, hammered thin, or decorated with symbolic marks. Some appeared in burial contexts or ceremonial pits, suggesting they were used as offerings or insignia of rank. One of the most mysterious discoveries was what archaeologists called the sacred boundary, a long, curved line of darker soil stretching across part of the site, rich in ash, shell fragments, and ritual objects. It seemed to divide the village into two distinct zones, one for daily living and another for ceremonial purposes. To the Powhatan, boundaries like this carried deep spiritual meaning. They marked the threshold between the ordinary world and the spiritual one. Crossing that line may have been part of religious rites or leadership ceremonies. The scale of Wokomoko surprised even experienced archaeologists. Most Powhatan villages were modest in size, often housing a few dozen families. But Wokomoko was a metropolis by comparison. An organized, fortified complex that suggested political coordination on a regional level. It wasn't just a collection of huts. It was a capital city, complete with defensive palisades and specialized spaces for leaders, priests, and warriors. Local legends have long referred to the place as the Lost Fort. Even though the Powhatan people didn't build stone forts, the site's massive wooden walls and earthen foundations must have looked imposing. And some of those walls were built over earlier ones, suggesting that Wokomoko had been fortified multiple times through its history. Whether it was for protection against rival tribes or for spiritual enclosure, no one knows for certain. And then there are the stories, the kind you only hear from locals who've lived along the York River all their lives. Some say that on still nights, strange lights appear over the riverbank, glowing orange or red, as if a fire burns just out of sight. Locals call them Powhatans, torches, or sometimes the old fire. Fishermen claim to hear faint drums echoing from the woods, though no one lives there anymore. Scientists dismiss it as swamp gas or sound distortion over water, but the stories persist. For the descendants of the Powhatan tribes, those lights are something sacred reminders that their ancestors still keep watch over their ancient homeland. Today, Wokomoko is recognized as one of the most important Native American archaeological sites in the United States. It's now part of the National Park Service's Chesapeake Trail Network, though it's not open for casual exploration. The area is carefully protected out of respect for the tribal nations who still consider it holy ground. Only limited guided tours and educational visits are permitted, and even those are done with the cooperation of Virginia's indigenous communities. Visiting the site, you wouldn't see grand ruins or reconstructed lot. What you'll find is quiet countryside, a broad field overlooking the shimmering York River. The ground slopes gently down to the water, and the only sound is the rustle of wind through tall grass. It's the kind of place where you feel the past pressing up from beneath your feet, subtle but undeniable. You can sense that this land once carried enormous importance, even if time has erased the visible traces. For modern archaeologists and tribal historians, Wokomoko represents something deeper than a discovery. It's a bridge between two worlds. For centuries, American history started with Jamestown, but Wokomoko pushes that timeline back by generations. It reminds us that sophisticated, politically organized societies existed here long before the English arrived. Chief Powhatan's world wasn't primitive or isolated. It was part of a living network of people, beliefs, and trade that connected much of the continent. And yet, the site still holds unanswered questions. Why was Wokomoko eventually abandoned? Was it due to colonial expansion, or had it already been declining before the English came? Some environmental data suggest that rising sea levels and flooding may have slowly pushed the settlement back from the river's edge. Others believe it was moved for spiritual reasons after the death of a great chief. Powhatan himself relocated his seat of power several times in his lifetime, perhaps as part of ritual tradition or practical strategy. Whatever the reason, The land itself remains. Archaeologists continue to study it using known invasive methods: ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and aerial mapping to avoid disturbing sacred ground. Each year, the site yields new insight into how the Powhatan people lived and what they believed, but it also continues to hum with mystery, both literal and symbolic. There's something powerful about standing on land that once served as the heart of an ancient civilization. You can almost imagine the sound of voices carried by the wind, laughter, the rhythmic beat of drums echoing through the forests. You can picture canoes gliding across the river, carrying diplomats, traders, or visiting leaders from distant tribes. The sun sets over the water the same way it did 1,000 years ago, and the river glows red as if reflecting that ancient fire that once burned in the center of Wokomoko. The wooden walls of the fort have long since decayed, and the sacred fire has gone cold, but the spirit of the place still lingers, woven into the land itself. In that sense, Wokomoko isn't truly lost. It's waiting quietly for people to listen again. The mystery of the Great Dismal Swamp settlements. If you drive along the Virginia-North Carolina border, you might come across a vast stretch of wilderness called the Great Dismal Swamp. The name itself feels heavy, almost warning you away. It's a place of still black water, dense cypress trees, and fog that seems to roll in from nowhere. Even today, much of it remains impenetrable, but hidden deep within that wilderness are the remains of something few people realize existed. Ancient and secret settlements that may hold one of the strangest and most powerful stories in Virginia's history. The Great Dismal Swamp covers nearly 800 square miles, stretching across southeastern Virginia into northeastern North Carolina. It's one of the last truly wild landscapes on the East Coast, and for centuries, it's been both feared and revered. The early colonists called it dismal because it was nearly impossible to navigate thick with vines, quicksand-like bogs, and swarms of biting insects. But to those who understood it, the swamp wasn't just a hostile wasteland, it was a refuge. Long before European settlement, the area was home to native tribes who understood its rhythms. Archaeological evidence suggests that indigenous people lived around its edges and, in some cases, deep within it for thousands of years. They hunted deer and bear, fished in the dark canals, and built raised dwellings on the high hummocks, small patches of dry ground rising out of the swamp-like islands. These islands are where the mystery begins. When English colonists began expanding inland in the 1600s, the Great Dismal Swamp became a place of escape. Runaway enslaved people, displaced Native Americans, and those fleeing persecution or war found safety in its depths. Over time, they formed hidden communities, self-sustaining settlements that existed completely apart from colonial society. These groups became known as maroons, a term used throughout the Americas for escaped slaves who created their own secret societies in remote areas. But what made the Dismal Swamp settlements different was their longevity and the strange sense of permanence they left behind. For decades, rumors spread among locals and explorers about entire villages hidden in the swamp, complete with houses built on stilts, small farms, and even temples or sacred enclosures. Some said there were stone foundations deep in the interior that predated the colonial era entirely. Others claimed the Maroons had discovered ruins from an earlier, unknown civilization that once lived there. When explorers and surveyors later tried to map the swamp, they occasionally reported hearing distant drums or seeing columns of smoke rising from areas that seemed impossible to reach. The first written clues about these mysterious settlements appeared in the 1700s. Surveyors working for George Washington, who once owned land bordering the swamp, noted signs of human activity far from any known trail toes, pottery, and faint traces of raised mounds. Washington himself tried to drain parts of the swamp to create farmland, but quickly realized its interior was nearly untamable. He wrote that it was a vast body of mire and muck, inhabited only by wild creatures, and perhaps worse reflected a colonial fear. The knowledge that people were living there beyond control or taxation. By the early 1800s, the Great Dismal Swamp had become a full-fledged underground refuge. Escaped slaves, native outcasts, and free blacks built a network of small, hidden villages deep within its boundaries. Archaeological excavations in recent years have uncovered tools, ceramics, and remnants of log cabins built on elevated hummocks, confirming that human communities thrived there for generations. Some of these settlements appear to have existed from the 1600s into the 1800s, making them among the longest-running maroon communities in North America. What makes the mystery deeper is that the swamp seems to have layers of history even older than that, beneath some of the maroon sites. Archaeologists have found traces of much earlier human presence, buried fire pits, and fragments of ancient pottery that could date back several thousand years. No one knows for sure who those early inhabitants were or why they vanished. Some believe they were seasonal hunters, while others suggest they belonged to a long-forgotten tribe that built ceremonial sites within the swamp long before recorded history. Local legends only blur the line further. There's an old story passed down by both native communities and African-American descendants of the swamp settlers. It tells of a lost people who came to the swamp to protect something sacred. According to some versions, they carried with them sacred stones or relics from a destroyed homeland, hiding them deep in the swamp where no one could find them. In this legend, the swamp itself becomes a guardian, a living entity that protects its secrets. There are also recurring tales of strange lights and sounds. Hunters and researchers have reported orbs of pale green light drifting over the water at night, or the faint rhythm of drums echoing far off in the fog. Scientists have attributed some of these phenomena to swamp gas and acoustic illusions, but not everyone is convinced. Some visitors claim to have heard whispers when standing near the ancient hummock-soft voices in the mist that stop when you turn your head. For locals, the swamp has always been a place where the boundary between the living and the spiritual is thin. Despite centuries of curiosity, the Great Dismal Swamp has never fully revealed its secrets. Its dense vegetation and dangerous terrain make archaeological work difficult, and most of the interior remains unexplored. What little has been uncovered points to a remarkable story of survival and adaptation. The maroon communities built elevated huts out of cypress wood, fished and hunted, and cultivated small patches of crops. Some even developed trade routes with sympathetic outsiders along the edges of the swamp. But how many people lived there? That question remains unanswered. Estimates range from a few dozen to several thousand over different time periods. Even more puzzling are the structures that have occasionally been spotted from the air. Rectangular patterns of raised earth that do match natural formations. Some researchers believe they could be remnants of drainage ditches or canals built by 19th century lumber operations. Others, however, think these might be the traces of ancient boundaries or foundations, perhaps from an earlier, forgotten culture that predated the Maroons entirely. Satellite imagery has revealed several of these anomalies, but few have been investigated up close. Standing on the edge of the swamp today, it's easy to understand why so many mysteries linger. The air is thick with humidity, the ground soft and unpredictable. Every sound, every bird call, every ripple feels magnified. There's a kind of primal energy to the place, something that makes you aware of your own smallness. Even though part of the Great Dismal Swamp is now protected as a national wildlife refuge, much of it remains wild and inaccessible. The swamp guards its history fiercely. Modern archaeologists, working in partnership with descendant communities, continue to explore the edges of the swamp using known invasive methods like ground radar and core sampling. Each small discovery, a pottery shard, a piece of iron, a charred hearth adds another layer to the story. The descendants of those who once lived in the swamp now help guide research, sharing oral histories passed down through generations. For them, the mystery of the Great Dismal Swamp isn't just academic, it's personal. It's a story of endurance, freedom, and faith. But there's still an element of the unknown that refuses to be pinned down. Who were the first people to call the swamp home? Were they simply survivors? Or was there something about the land itself that drew them, here a sense of power, protection, or prophecy? No one can say for certain. The swamp's silence is its own answer. If you visit today, you can walk along raised trails that cut through the outer edges. You'll see cypress knees rising like jagged spires from the water. dragonflies hovering over black pools, and the endless reflection of sky on still water. It's beautiful in a haunting way. Somewhere beyond those trails, hidden under layers of peat and water, lie the remains of homes, tools, and maybe even shrines built by people who refused to be found. The Great Dismal Swamp remains what it has always been, a sanctuary for secrets, a place that resists control, that holds the echoes of countless lives lived in defiance of history's reach. Some mysteries stay buried, not because they are forgotten, but because the land itself has chosen to keep them. And in the Dismal Swamp, that silence speaks volumes. The hidden chambers beneath Jamestown Island. When most people think of Jamestown Island, they imagine the birthplace of English America, a modest outpost along Virginia's James River where settlers carved out the first permanent colony in 1607. The story has been told for centuries. Wooden forts, starvation winters, uneasy alliances with and the survival that led to everything that came after, but buried beneath that familiar narrative is something far less understood. An underworld of sealed tunnels, buried vaults, and hidden chambers beneath the island itself. It sounds like folklore kind of rumor, whispered by guides to keep tourists intrigued. Yet, over the past few decades, fragments of evidence have begun to suggest there may be some truth behind the whispers. Beneath Jamestown's reconstructed church and archaeological fields, strange cavities and sealed stone structures have been detected, spaces that do fit neatly into any known part of the colony's official history. To understand the mystery, we have to start with the island's geography. Jamestown was built on a low, swampy peninsula, chosen because it was defensible and surrounded by navigable water. But those same conditions also made it a nightmare to live in. The ground was unstable, the drinking water brackish, and the summers unbearable. Over the centuries, erosion and flooding reshaped the shoreline, burying large parts of the original settlement under layers of silt and debris. Many assumed that whatever was lost beneath the island had been destroyed by nature, but maybe not everything sank by accident. In the late 1990s, when archaeologists from the Jamestown Rediscovery Project began excavations to locate the original fort, they stumbled across something they hadn't expected. Small voids in the soil beneath the main site, some lined with hand-hewn timber and brick. Initially, these were thought to be collapsed wells or root cellars, but deeper imaging revealed chambers with uniform, deliberate construction, too precise to be random sinkholes, too deep to serve as simple storage. One of the first hints came from beneath the old church tower. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what appeared to be a rectangular cavity roughly 10 feet below the surface, lined with stone and sealed with what looked like clay or plaster. Early tests suggested that it was built during the colonial period, but no record of its construction exists in the extensive Jamestown archives. When the chamber was partially investigated, researchers discovered only fragments of brick and a few corroded iron tools. The rest remained sealed out of respect for the fragile structures above. So, what was it? A hidden crypt, a storehouse, or something more unusual? Some historians have proposed that these chambers were early attempts at cold storage or makeshift storm shelters. Others believe they may have been built during the early 1600s as secret caches for supplies or weapons designed to protect them during periods of siege. But not everyone agrees. A small but persistent group of researchers argues that at least some of the underground spaces were ceremonial in nature, constructed by Freemasons, alchemists, or members of secret societies among the colonial elite. It sounds far-fetched until you realize how deeply the early settlers were tied to such ideas. Many of the Virginia Company's founders in England were known to have Masonic or esoteric leanings. The colony's mission, after all, was not just commercial. It carried a spiritual and imperial ambition, a vision of creating a new Jerusalem in the wilderness. Some writings from that era, including those of Francis Bacon, spoke of the New World as a place of divine experimentation, a land where science, faith, and hidden knowledge could merge. If any of those ideals reached Jamestown's shores, it's not impossible to imagine secret chambers built for purposes that went beyond mere survival. Local folklore supports that notion in odd ways. There are stories told by old caretakers and amateur diggers of stone-lined tunnels found along the island especially near the western end where the original fort once stood. One 19th century farmer claimed his plow struck a buried stone archway that led to a small chamber filled with waterlogged timber. When he tried to dig it out, the soil collapsed and the opening disappeared. Others tell of strange carved symbols found on old bricks unearthed near the same area, crosses, stars, and geometric markings that resemble Masonic emblems. Even stranger are reports from the early 1900s, when Jamestown was being prepared for the 300th anniversary celebration. Workers clearing brush along the riverbank allegedly uncovered a brick-lined tunnel leading inland before it abruptly ended in a wall of clay. The account was never officially recorded, but it circulated among locals for decades. Some claim that a few of those workers described hearing hollow echoes beneath their feet when they stood near the ruins of the first church. Modern archaeological scans continue to reveal anomalies under the island. Perfectly rectangular voids that do end correspond to known wells or foundations. Most are left untouched to preserve the delicate environment, but the data remains puzzling. A few of the voids appear connected, forming what looks like a pattern of corridors or adjoining rooms. It's entirely possible they're remnants of old drainage systems or collapsed root cellars, yet their alignment suggests a level of planning inconsistent with the haphazard construction typical of the colony's early years. Some researchers believe these spaces may have been repurposed over centuries. During the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, Jamestown Island served as a strategic site multiple times. Troops camped there, fortifications were built, and tunnels may have been reused for storing gunpowder or supplies. But the oldest layers, the ones sealed deep beneath the original fort, remain unexplained. Adding to the intrigue are early 17th century letters referencing hidden chambers below in vague, passing phrases. One document, written by an English surveyor in 1611, mentions a deep place under the palisade for the keeping of goods and other matter. Another, written decades later, speaks of ancient brickwork found in the ground whose purpose is unknown. Neither proves the existence of a vast underground network, but they show that buried spaces were known even then. Local legends took those fragments and built something much larger. Some old-timers around the region still talk about the Vault of Jamestown, a sealed chamber said to hold relics from the colony's earliest years, perhaps even lost records or sacred items intended to preserve the founder's spiritual vision. A few versions of the story even suggest that during the starving time of 1609 to 1610, when desperation overtook the colony, a group of settlers hid away valuables or darker things in underground rooms, never to return for them. Even more haunting are the ghost stories tied to those chambers. Visitors and night watchmen have long reported hearing faint tapping or whispers near the church ruins after dark, as if something stirs beneath the earth. Some say it's the sound of the colonists who died during that brutal winter, their bodies buried in unmarked graves. Others think it's the restless energy of something else, something still sealed below. Today, Jamestown is a carefully managed archaeological site. The dig teams work slowly, layer by layer, revealing parts of the original fort, homes, and burial sites. Every artifact, nails, beads, bones is cataloged, and yet the deepest parts of the island remain largely untouched. Preservation rules prevent deep excavation in most areas, meaning those hidden voids may stay sealed indefinitely. Standing on the wooden walkway overlooking the James River, it's hard to imagine secret tunnels beneath your feet. The place feels peaceful now, even ordinary. The sunlight glints off the water, tourists snap photos, and the old church steeple rises quietly against the sky. But somewhere below, beyond reach, are cavities that no one can explain, chambers that have never seen daylight in centuries. Whether they were storage rooms, crypts, or ceremonial spaces, their presence reminds us that Jamestown was more than a colony. It was an experiment shaped by desperation, faith, and perhaps secrecy. Beneath its familiar story of survival lies another narrative still buried in the soil, a quiet suggestion that the beginnings of America might have had shadows deeper than anyone realized. If those sealed chambers are ever opened, they might hold relics of ordinary life tools, bones, forgotten belongings, or they might reveal something far stranger. Until then, Jamestown's greatest mystery remains literally underground, waiting in silence beneath the birthplace of a nation, the ghost mounds of the Roanoke River basin, along the quiet bends of Virginia's Roanoke River, where mist gathers above the water at dawn and the landscape still feels wild. Stories linger about the ghost mounds. These weren't spectral in the literal sense, but they earned the name because they vanished. Large earthen mounds that once dotted the riverbanks, seen by early settlers and surveyors, but now lost to floods, farming, and time itself. Yet, their memory endures in journals, oral histories, and scattered hints buried beneath the soil, pointing to something ancient and mysterious that once stood here long before Europeans arrived. When early explorers entered the Roanoke Valley in the 1600s, they described curious ridges along the river, rounded human-made hills spaced evenly like a pattern. Some stood nearly 20 feet high. They weren't natural formations, and the locals, the Siouan-speaking tribes who inhabited the region, had stories that only deepened the intrigue. They spoke of the people before, an older race who built mounds as sacred places of ceremony and burial long before the tribes who then roamed the area. As settlers expanded westward, they flattened many of these mounds for agriculture, thinking little of their origins. Some were destroyed when the Roanoke River was dammed, flooding entire valleys. By the late 1800s, maps and first-hand reports still noted several mound clusters between present-day Salem and South Boston. Yet, by the mid-1900s, few could even point to where they once stood. What makes their story haunting is how completely they disappeared, leaving only fragments of memory arrowheads and pottery shards washed up after heavy rains. Archaeologists who studied Virginia's river systems have long debated whether these mounds were related to the Mississippian culture or the great mound builders of Cahokia and the Ohio Valley, or if they represented something entirely local. The Roanoke River lies near the edge of where Mississippian influence reached, making it a kind of frontier between cultural worlds. If the mounds were indeed Mississippian, that would suggest trade or migration stretching far into the interior of the continent. But the tools and designs found near the area show subtle differences, suggesting an independent mound-building tradition, one that may have developed in isolation. There's a recurring local legend that ties these mounds to a forgotten tribe. In early settler tales passed through generations in Roanoke County and Halifax, people spoke of a vanished people who worshipped the sun and buried their dead in circular earthworks, aligned with the solstices. Supposedly, strange lights once appeared above those sites, and on rare nights, ghostly drum beats could be heard near the water. These accounts, half folklore and half oral record, make historians wonder whether early settlers stumbled upon ancient ceremonial grounds, misunderstood them, and then reshaped them through storytelling into something supernatural. The few recorded excavations from the early 1900s uncovered human remains laid in intricate patterns, sometimes accompanied by stone pipes, shells, and carved effigies. Unfortunately, much of this material was lost or undocumented. Amateur diggers often took artifacts without recording context, and state archives hold only vague sketches. A 1911 Virginia Historical Society note mentions a ring of bones in an earthen rise by the river near Roanoke, but the site it describes is now submerged under a reservoir. What was once an archaeological frontier became farmland and then suburban expansion, leaving modern researchers chasing ghosts in both the literal and figurative sense. The environmental transformation of the Roanoke Basin also helped erase the physical traces. In the 20th century, flood control and soil regrading changed river paths. Old channels filled in, meanders were straightened, and many low-lying sites disappeared under mud. Locals sometimes report digging fence posts or garden beds and finding layers of charcoal, old pottery, or strange darkened soil that looks like ancient hearths. These small clues hint that more lies buried, perhaps deeper than most realize. Even today, amateur historians and metal detectorists still explore the banks near Brookneal and Danville. They find quartz tools, shell beads, and occasional fragments of copper that likely came from distant trade routes. Some claim to have found mounds covered by trees, barely distinguishable unless viewed from above. Satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning have revealed subtle topographical rizzes that align in geometric formations, suggesting the outlines of forgotten sites. Whether they're truly ancient mounds or natural hills is still debated. But technology is offering a second chance to rediscover what nature hid. The idea of ghost mounds also speaks to the broader mystery of how much has been lost. Before colonization, Virginia was covered with thousands of earthen structures, villages, ceremonial centers, and burial mounds. Most were plowed over, mined for dirt, or washed away. What's unique about the Roanoke Basin is how quickly they vanished from even local memory. By the mid-1900s, older residents recalled raised fields along the water but didn't realize they were part of something ancient. In that way, the term ghost doesn't just describe absence. It reflects collective forgetting. Some researchers believe that beneath the sediments, near old meanders, entire mound complexes may still be preserved. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers once discovered unusual soil patterns while conducting flood surveys in the 1980s. They recorded circular soil discolorations consistent with anthropogenic features, but no further excavation was done. Those records remain tucked away in technical archives, fueling curiosity among local archaeologists who suspect the ghost mounds might not be entirely gone, just hidden. There's also an emotional dimension to these places. For the descendants of tribes once native to the area, like the Monacan Indian Nation, these sites hold spiritual significance. Some community members see the mounds as part of their ancestral landscape, whether or not they built them. Visiting those areas even without visible mounds feels like standing on ground that remembers. During annual river gatherings, elders often remind visitors that nothing is ever truly lost beneath the river. It's a poetic but deeply felt belief that the earth holds memory, even when people forget. The Roanoke River today winds through farmland, forest, and quiet, small towns. It's a peaceful landscape, but if you know where to look, you can sense layers of history beneath your feet. Near the confluence with the Don River, old maps still mark an area called Moundfield. No mounds are visible there anymore, but after a heavy rain, strange geometric shadows sometimes appear on the fields, visible from drones or airplanes like faint bruises in the land's surface. Some locals say these are the spirits of the mounds revealing themselves briefly before fading back into the earth. Standing near those fields, especially at dusk, when the light is low, you get a strange feeling and awareness that this quiet place once mattered profoundly to someone long ago. The wind moves through the reeds. The river reflects the sky. And for a moment, you can almost imagine what those early travelers saw. Great domes of earth rising from the banks, sacred and silent. The mystery of the ghost mounds isn't about whether they existed. We know they did. The mystery lies in who built them, what they meant, and how they vanished so completely. Were they ceremonial centers marking the solar cycle? Were they burial grounds for an ancient community lost to history? Or did they serve both roles, connecting the living and the dead through the rhythm of the land? Modern archaeology might one day answer those questions, especially as new mapping tools continue to reveal hidden shapes beneath the surface. But even if the mounds are rediscovered, something about their story will always belong to myth. The idea that a civilization can rise, create sacred landscapes, and then dissolve so completely that only whispers remain. For now, the Roanoke River keeps its secrets. The soil hides its history well, and the current flows past the places where the mounds once stood, carrying the memory forward in silence. Visitors who walk along those banks today might see nothing unusual, but if they pause and listen to the way the river laps against the shore, the faint rustle of grass in the breeze, they might sense it too. That quiet hum beneath the land, as if something ancient is still there, just waiting to be remembered.